What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And it's been a while since we've checked out the Izzet Phoenix deck in the format, and with a newfound appreciation for it, I want to talk about it again, some of the new changes that the deck has made since the last time that we looked at it, and I think changes that are definitely for the better, just from how the dynamic of the deck actually changes from being able to kind of have an extra layer to your game plan that isn't just trying to get back a ton of Arclight Phoenixes. But before we get too deep into the deck and we talk about some of the ins and outs of the Izzet Phoenix deck, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos, please consider subscribing to my channel and ring the notification bell so you know when future videos get posted, and it is a free, easy way to support me and my content. So, Izzet Phoenix for Pioneer. The main game plan and kind of the reason for playing this deck, how it's built, etc., is this card Arclight Phoenix. So a 4-mana 3/2 with flying and haste is not very exciting. It is definitely decent to kind of play it as just like a super aggressive, like 3/2 creature for 4 mana, but obviously not very efficient when you consider all the other 4-drops that exist in Pioneer, just in the Pioneer format. But Arclight Phoenix has this fancy line of text that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've cast 3 or more instant or sorcery spells this turn, return Arclight Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you're able to do quite a few things with this. So one thing you can do is discarding it, and you have a few different discard outlets. You have a card like Ledger Shredder, which also doubles as a threat. So whenever you cast, whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives, means that you can draw a card, then discard a card. If you discard a non-land card, Ledger Shredder gets a +1/+1 counter. So this is like a way that you can get rid of Arclight Phoenixes. You can put a counter on the Ledger Shredder, and just kind of keep things moving. You have Picklock Prankster, again, kind of doubles as a threat, especially with a new addition to the deck that we'll get to later, where you can cast the Free the Fae half of it at instant speed. You mill 4 cards, put an instant sorcery or fairy from among the mill cards in your hand, so you can get any one of the other instant sorceries in your deck. You can also then pick up other Picklock Pranksters, or if you happen to find it, the one of Brazen Borrow, which also just happens to be a fairy that can bounce a non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand, so it's a way to kind of interact with some potential graveyard hate, maybe get some giant creatures out of the way, which at least in this deck and potentially in mirrors can come up, and that ability or that spell will be very, very powerful. So these are kind of like your main threats. These are like the ways that you're winning the game. Picklock Prankster gets to forward kind of your game plan with Arclight Phoenix, and honestly, in a way, becomes one of your best like non-Phoenix creatures in your deck for what we're going to be showing off here in a second, which is Profane Alcetic Memory. So this is a 2-mana legendary enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. You have no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn more than 1 card this turn, you put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards you draw this turn -1. So basically, you just don't count your draw step in basically like a short way. You don't count your draw step, and then every card you've drawn after that first card, you can then put counters on creatures. This works especially well considering our main ways of drawing cards are Consider, Opt, and Treasure Cruise. Treasure Cruise obviously being your best one when when you're playing Prof's Eidetic Memory, because Treasure Cruise is not only going to draw you 3 cards, but it's going to end up putting 3 power into play. One thing that this list is not playing that I do really like after kind of playing the deck is 2 cards. 1 Temporal Trespass, which is essentially a triple blue and 8 where you can delve and then take an extra turn, and then also the Galvanic Iteration, which allows you to copy the next instant or sorcery spell you play for 2 mana, and then you can flash it back for 3. Just getting to do it with Treasure Cruise is nuts of its own. Profs just adds another layer of just absolutely putting your opponent to the woodshed with kind of what you have going on. So imagine this like a scenario where like you play Profs on turn 2, whatever. Then you start playing like a Ledger Shredder, and then you decide to play like a Consider. You trigger the Connive on the Ledger Shredder, you end up drawing a card, discarding a card, whatever. Make Ledger Shredder a 2/4. You bin another card with Consider and draw a card. You've already drawn 2 cards this turn, so this Ledger Shredder is a 4/6 on turn 3, which does a lot to stop a good amount of offense from your opponent. If you reverse the order and you play a Ledger Shredder first, then you go like Profs into Consider, you get to draw like 3 cards. So then this is a potentially a 5/7 if you discard a land, or a 4/6 if you just discard a land with the Ledger Shredder. Either way you look at it, a 4/6 or a 5/7 is absolutely it's really hard to deal with. I know Fatal Push runs around in the format, but if your opponent's not playing Fatal Push, it's really hard to kind of deal with a Ledger Shredder very efficiently, especially, again, the fact that you just drew 3 cards as well. You really didn't lose any amount of cards, and, again, with this Profs going, your Treasure Cruises are going to be absolutely insane. And I kind of go back to Picklock Prankster being one of the better creatures in the deck, because while Ledger Shredder is going to help you trigger Profs and kind of get you more value from it, and then you can kind of like move the counter around with the extra card you draw, putting it on Picklock Prankster, absolutely nuts. Like, can you imagine, like, putting 3-4 counters on a Ledger Shredder is pretty good. Imagine putting 4 counters on a Picklock Prankster where it ends up being a 5/7 flying and vigilance, so you're going to be able to attack for 5 and then also play defense with this. It's going to stop a lot of offense from your opponents, and it just overall makes this card a lot better. I think like the 1/3 vigilance was kind of like whatever, the fact that you're playing it for Free the Fae, and then most of the time it kind of stood in like that weird adventure zone to where you were going to play it because eventually it would trigger like the Ledger Shredders and whatnot, but now the fact that this can be infinitely more threatening with something like a Profs, absolutely great. Some other things to kind of consider in the deck, no pun intended. You have Lightning Axe. This is like another way that you can discard Arclight Phoenix, or really just like fuel like your Treasure Cruises and whatnot. And then if you make the changes that I suggested, it can end up fueling the Temporal Trespass as well. Mana base, really simple. You have 2 Hall of the Storm Giants. As weird as it sounds, having a land that comes into play tapped if it's not your first or second land, or I guess you control 2 or more other lands. Either way, like a land that has like conditionally comes into play untapped and only produces blue mana, you do get the 6 mana surprisingly often. Again, when you're drawing cards with like Treasure Cruise and Ledger Shredder, and then Profs, even getting to draw you cards, and all the 1 mana cantrips that you have, it's very easy to hit your land drops while also being able to cast multiple spells in a turn. So definitely getting to the point where you can animate a Hall of the Storm Giants and attack with it is going to be absolutely insane. Your opponent's probably run out of resources, and it has Ward 3 as well. Like, they're not going to be able to struggle to necessarily pay for it. But either way, it kind of puts them in a weird spot, because now like their Fatal Pushes and stuff cost like 4 mana if they're trying to be relatively efficient and trying to deal with your threats and whatnot. Like Hall of the Storm Giants is kind of an annoying one to deal with because you didn't deploy any resources into their resources like it was a land that you were going to play anyway. You have 3 island in the deck. You have an Otawara as like your utility land. You can just channel this and then bounce an annoying permanent. You have River Glide Pathway, which also is Lava Glide Pathway, which is essentially a dual land. An honorary dual land. You have Spire Bluff Canal, 4 Steam Beds, and a Stormcarved Coast. The Stormcarved Coast came into play untapped a lot more than you would expect. Never really felt awkward if it was like one of my 2 lands, because I kind of wanted to find a 3rd land anyway to, either play a Ledger Shredder plus a 1 mana spell, or like Profs into 1 mana spell with like a Ledger Shredder on turn 2, whatnot. It just never really felt awkward. So just playing 1's fine. I don't think playing more is going to help. This sideboard, you have 2 Aether Gust, 2 Negate, 2 Third Path Iconoclast, 2 Angular Gods, 1 Ashiok, a Brazen Borrower, 2 Fable, the Mirror Breaker, Mystical Dispute. I really like Fable in the sideboard here. I don't think it's necessarily what you want to be doing as like a main board plan, I guess, unless you really want to. I'm not sure exactly what you cut to play the 3 mana card, but I think for game 1s, it's definitely fine to not do that, but then like kind of sideboard into this sort of kind of a Fable deck. It's just a lot of good value for this card, and just ends up being pretty. It's really good. It ends up being very good in kind of like those grindier matchups. And of course, you have Mystical Dispute to kind of fight against some of the other counter spells. Ashiok was pretty decent. I actually put it against an opponent, and I milled myself with Ashiok and then exiled their graveyard, and they had to double check the Ashiok to make sure that that's how that actually worked, which was kind of funny, because it is a very unintuitive thing to where you mill somebody else, but then you still exile all the opponent's graveyards and stuff. Anger of the Gods ended up being pretty good in some spots. Third Path Iconoclast, I think some people talked about like not playing this card and just playing to play around like Mystical Dispute and playing the Young Pyromancer. I'm sure there's reasons for playing this card and for not playing this card. I don't know if it really matters. I'd probably just go play Young Peasy because it's the OG, but I'm not going to lambast you if you decide to play Third Path Iconoclast. Negate Aether Gust, just, I mean, with Mono Green being very popular in the format right now, I think Aether Gust is a pretty good option just to kind of tempo your opponent and kind of get around some uncounterability things. So that is the Izzet Phoenix deck for the Pioneer format. Again, there's a few changes I would make to the deck, but overall, you know, this deck is great. Really, Prof adding an extra layer to kind of all your threats, where, again, if your opponent is like playing Fatal Push, like, yeah, like it technically gets better because the creatures they are killing are bigger, but every creature in this deck is now an immense threat. I mean, like, can end the game threat. I actually had a match where I played against the Mirror, and my opponent was at 18 life, and I think I had like a 5 or 6 power Ledger Shredder. I just ended up killing them from 18. Like, that's just the explosive power through a creature, mind you. I mean, like, I played a few spells to like get rid of like their creatures and stuff, but I mean, really, the fact that I hit them for 20 plus damage and was able to still interact with their board, push damage, whatnot, is insane. And it's really a lot thanks in part to Prof's Eidetic Memory, just kind of, again, making every creature in this deck a threat, making your Picklock Pranksters and Brazen Borrowers a lot harder to attack through, and to, you know, basically forcing them to have a blocker for them every turn, especially in the case of Picklock Prankster, where, again, the Vigilance and the Flying is so good when you can hit your opponent for 5, and then you have a 7 toughness, 5 power blocker back, waiting to just essentially kill whatever, and forcing your opponent, in the case for like some of the aggro decks, like having to go pretty hard into a Slick Shot Show Off and putting a lot of spells into it to try to get it to survive the Picklock Prankster, only to really not get through much damage and for it to kind of barely stick around, or to just trade off with one as well when you've already gotten an immense amount of value from it. But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you think of the Izzet Phoenix deck. You know, rank me some of your favorite Pioneer decks to play. Give some suggestions, anything like that, as we look to close out the Pioneer RCQ season. So if you're not already qualified, you know, try to get to your RCQs. You know, play whatever decks you're comfortable with. I definitely recommend playing Izzet Phoenix. Maybe not exactly card for card this build, but, you know, some of the changes that I suggested and whatnot. So, and that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one.